I'm sitting here on my front porch in Kentucky, 84 years old, with a glass of sweet tea in my hand and a story on my heart that I've been carrying for more than 50 years. A story I never told my children. A story I never told my grandchildren. A story that most folks around here have long forgotten about, or maybe they just made up their own versions to fill in the blanks. My name is Evelyn Mae Turner, though back then I was Evelyn Mae Collins. And when I walked away in 1969, everyone in this town thought I was heartless. They said I was ungrateful. They said I abandoned a good man who was trying to help me. They said I was confused, troubled, maybe even a little bit crazy. But I wasn't crazy. I was just a young girl trying to stay alive. Today, sitting here with the afternoon sun warm on my face and the cicadas singing in the trees like they've done every summer since I was born, I've decided it's time to tell the truth. The whole truth. Because I'm old enough now that I don't care what people think anymore, and because there are young women out there who need to hear this story. Need to know that sometimes walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. I can still see that night clear as day. June 14th, 1969. I was 21 years old, though I felt about 100. I left everything behind. The house my daddy built, the land he worked himself to death to pay for, my mama's grave, my whole life. I walked out in the middle of the night with one dress, one small suitcase, and a heart so heavy I thought it might stop beating right there in the dark. People ask me sometimes, the few who still remember, why I left. They say, "Evelyn, what made you just up and disappear like that? Harold seemed like such a good man. He was respectable, went to church, had a business in town. What could have been so bad?" And I smile because they don't know. They never knew. Nobody knew except me and him and that doctor he paid off. My husband wanted to have me committed to the state mental hospital. Not because I was sick, not because I needed help, but because my daddy had left me property, and the only way Harold could get his hands on it legally was if I was declared mentally unfit. And back in 1969, in a small town in Kentucky, all it took was a husband's word and a doctor's signature, and a woman could disappear into one of those places for the rest of her life. I found the papers. I found all of it. The fake medical evaluations, the commitment forms already filled out, the property transfer documents just waiting for my incapacity to be official. He had it all planned out, neat as you please, like he was planning a business transaction. Which I guess to him, that's all it was. When I think back on it now, I can still feel that cold terror that went through me when I opened that file folder he had hidden in his desk. Can still see those words typed out on official-looking paper. Patient displays signs of emotional instability, unable to manage her own affairs, requires immediate psychiatric intervention for her own safety and the safety of others. I had never been to a psychiatrist, never been evaluated by any doctor for anything more than a winter cold. But there it was, signed by Dr. Morrison, Harold's fishing buddy, dated 2 weeks prior. A complete fabrication. A lie that was going to steal my freedom, my property, and probably my life. Because I knew what happened to women in those state hospitals. We all knew, even if nobody talked about it. You went in for hysteria, or nervous exhaustion, or being difficult, and you never came out the same. If you came out at all, they'd give you drugs, electric shocks, keep you sedated and confused. And your husband would be free to do whatever he wanted with everything that used to be yours. That's what Harold was counting on, that I was too young, too naive, too obedient to figure it out in time. That I'd just go along with it when he told me I needed help, when Dr. Morrison recommended treatment, when they showed up with the papers to take me away. But I wasn't as stupid as he thought, and I wasn't going to let him do it. Looking back now, with all these years between me and that scared girl I used to be, I understand things I couldn't understand then. I understand that I was caught in a time when women, especially young women in small towns, didn't have much say over their own lives. We were passed from father to husband like property changing hands. We were expected to be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity and freedom men decided to give us. My daddy tried to protect me by leaving that land in my name. He must have known something might happen to him. He had a bad heart, everyone knew it, and he wanted to make sure I'd have something of my own, something that couldn't be taken away. He went to the county clerk's office and put it all in my name legally. The house, the 40 acres, the small barn, everything. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that putting property in a young woman's name in 1968 was like painting a target on her back. Especially in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, where a woman with assets was seen as a problem that needed solving. Harold solved it by marrying me. Or at least, that's what everyone thought he was doing. Being a good Christian man, taking care of a young widow's daughter, giving me stability and protection. Everyone praised him for it. The church ladies said I was blessed. The pastor called it providential. Nobody asked me what I wanted. Nobody wondered if maybe I was too young, too recently grieved, too unsure. Nobody thought it was strange that Harold, who was 37 years old, wanted to marry a girl of 19 who barely knew him. They just saw a problem solved. A young woman properly married off, safely under male control, the way God intended. But I saw the truth that night when I found those papers. I saw that my marriage was never about love, or protection, or partnership. It was a carefully planned theft, and the only thing standing between Harold and complete success was me. So I walked away. Not because I was ungrateful, not because I was confused or troubled or crazy, but because I was a young girl who wanted to live, who wanted to stay free, who refused to be locked up in some institution just so a man could steal what my daddy had left me. And now, 55 years later, I can finally tell this story. Because last week, something happened that proved I made the right choice all those years ago. Something that showed me that sometimes, when you walk away from danger, what's truly yours will wait for you. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. Let me tell you about the girl I used to be before everything changed, before Harold, before the fear, before the night I had to choose between my inheritance and my life. Let me tell you about growing up in rural Kentucky, in a time when young girls didn't get to dream too big, and where saying no to a man could cost you everything. This is my story, and I'm finally ready to tell it. I was born in 1948, right here in Harlan County, Kentucky, in a little farmhouse that my daddy built with his own 2 hands and the help of his brother. It wasn't much, just a simple wooden structure with a tin roof that pinged when it rained, and 3 small rooms that somehow held all the love and struggle of our little family. We didn't have running water inside until I was about 12. Before that, we had a pump out back and an outhouse about 50 yards from the house. In winter, walking out there in the freezing dark was about as miserable as anything you can imagine. In summer, the smell would get so bad you had to hold your breath the whole time. But that was normal for us. That was life for most folks in rural Kentucky back then. You made do with what you had, you worked hard, and you didn't complain. My daddy was a coal miner for 15 years before he saved up enough to buy those 40 acres and get out of the mines. His lungs were already bad by then, all that coal dust. But he was determined to have something of his own, something he could pass down. He wanted land, wanted to be his own boss, wanted to build something that would outlast him. He was a hard man, my daddy. Not mean, but hard. He didn't smile much, didn't talk much, just worked from sunup to sundown every single day. He'd wake before dawn, drink his coffee standing up in the kitchen, and head out to work the land. In the evenings, he'd come in bone-tired, wash up at the pump, eat his supper in silence, and fall asleep in his chair with the radio playing low. But I knew he loved me. He showed it in small ways, bringing me a pretty rock he'd found in the field, teaching me how to identify which plants were safe to eat, letting me ride on his shoulders when I was little, even though his back hurt. And he was the one who taught me to read, using an old Bible and a determination that his daughter wasn't going to grow up ignorant like he'd been forced to. My mama was softer, quieter. She was the one who kept the house running, who cooked and cleaned and mended and made everything work on almost nothing. She could stretch a chicken into 3 meals, could make clothes out of flour sacks, could grow vegetables in the poorest soil you ever saw. She was a magician with what little we had. Our house was simple, but it was home. The walls were plain wood, some of them covered with old newspapers for insulation. The floors were rough planks that gave you splinters if you walked barefoot. We had a wood-burning stove that heated the main room and did all our cooking. Mama would keep that fire going almost year-round, feeding it with kindling and logs that me and Daddy would chop and stack. We had a small porch out front where Daddy would sit on Sunday afternoons, the only day he allowed himself to rest. He'd rock in his chair and smoke his pipe and stare out at the land he'd worked so hard to own. Sometimes I'd sit with him, neither of us talking, just being together in the quiet. Behind the house was a small barn where we kept 2 cows, some chickens, and whatever pigs we were raising that year. I was responsible for the chickens from the time I was 7 years old. Every morning before school, I'd go out and feed them, scatter the corn, collect the eggs. Those eggs were precious. Some we ate, but most we sold in town to help with expenses. I loved those mornings, even when it was cold or raining. There was something peaceful about being out there with the chickens clucking around my feet, the sun just starting to come up over the hills, everything still and quiet, except for the sounds of the farm waking up. School was 3 miles away, a 1-room schoolhouse that held about 20 kids of all different ages. I walked there every day with my neighbors' kids, carrying my lunch in a tin pail, usually a biscuit with some preserves, and maybe an apple if we had them. The teacher, Miss Hadley, was young and enthusiastic, fresh from somewhere up north, with ideas about education that seemed almost radical for our little corner of Kentucky. She encouraged me to read, lent me books from her own small collection. I devoured them, Little Women, Anne of Green Gables, anything I could get my hands on. I loved school, loved learning, dreamed of maybe becoming a teacher myself one day. But I knew it was just a dream. Girls like me from families like mine didn't go to college. We finished high school if we were lucky, then got married and started our own families. That's just how it was. Sundays we went to church, the little Baptist church in town where everyone we knew attended. The preacher, Reverend Caldwell, was a fire and brimstone type who loved to preach about sin and redemption and the proper roles of men and women. "Wives, submit to your husbands," he'd thunder from the pulpit. "The man is the head of the household, as Christ is the head of the church." All the women would nod along, including my mama. That was just accepted truth. Men led, women followed. Men decided, women obeyed. That's what God wanted, what the Bible said, what society expected. I believed it too back then. Didn't question it. It was just the air we breathed, the water we swam in. That's how things were and how they'd always be. After church, the women would gather in the church basement for potluck, while the men stood outside talking about crops and weather and politics. The women would trade recipes and gossip, but mostly they'd talk about their husbands, what their husbands wanted, what their husbands said, what their husbands needed. Their whole lives revolved around their men. I watched my mama live that way. She never contradicted my daddy, never raised her voice, never expressed an opinion that wasn't his opinion first. She worked herself to the bone taking care of him and me and the house, and she never once complained. She'd say things to me like, "A good wife makes her husband's life easier," and "A woman's place is supporting her man," and I absorbed it all like gospel truth. When I was 16, Daddy started having heart troubles. He'd get short of breath doing simple things, would have to stop and rest in the middle of work. Mama would worry, would beg him to go to the doctor, but he'd wave her off. "Doctors cost money we don't have," he'd say. "I'm fine, just getting old." But he wasn't fine. And in February of 1967, 2 months after my 19th birthday, he collapsed in the barn while feeding the cows. By the time I found him and ran to get help, he was gone. Just like that. Heart attack, the doctor said. Probably didn't feel much pain. Small comfort for those of us left behind. We buried him in the church cemetery on a cold, gray day that matched how I felt inside. I stood there in my one black dress, watching them lower the only man who'd ever protected me into the ground, and I felt completely lost. Mama was beside me crying quietly, and I held her hand, and we were both thinking the same thing. What were we going to do now? That's when we found out about Daddy's will. He'd gone to a lawyer in town. Nobody even knew he'd done it, and had everything put in writing. The house, the land, the barn, everything. And he'd left it all to me. Not to Mama, which would have been normal. To me, his daughter, just 19 years old. The lawyer said Daddy had been clear about it. He said his wife would be taken care of by her daughter, but he wanted the property in Evelyn's name so nobody could take it from her. Said she was smart and strong and deserved something of her own. I cried when I heard that. Cried because Daddy had believed in me in a way I didn't even believe in myself. Cried because he was gone and I'd never be able to thank him. Cried because I had no idea how I was going to handle this responsibility. And I should have cried because having property as a young, unmarried woman in rural Kentucky in 1967 was about to make me a target. But I didn't know that yet. I was just a grieving 19-year-old girl trying to figure out how to keep the farm running and take care of her mama and somehow navigate a world that suddenly felt much bigger and scarier without my daddy in it. That's when Harold Whitmore came calling, and that's when everything started to fall apart. Harold Whitmore owned the feed store in town. It wasn't a big operation, but it was steady business. Every farmer in the county needed feed, seed, supplies. He'd inherited it from his father, and he ran it the same way, with the same stern efficiency, the same no-nonsense attitude toward customers and credit. I'd seen him around, of course. Small town like ours, you knew everybody. He was in his mid-30s, never been married, which people thought was a little strange, but nobody talked about much. He was a deacon at church, sat in the third pew every Sunday, sang the hymns in a deep bass voice that carried over everyone else's. He wasn't handsome, not really. Average height, stocky build, thinning brown hair he combed straight back. He had small eyes that never seemed to smile even when his mouth did, and hands that were soft from counting money instead of working land. The first time he came to our house after Daddy died, it was about a week after the funeral. Mama and I were still in that fog of grief where you just move through the days without really feeling anything. He knocked on the door with a covered dish in his hands, some kind of casserole from the church ladies, he said. "Mrs. Collins, Miss Evelyn, I just wanted to express my condolences and see if there's anything you ladies need." Mama invited him in, of course. That's what you did. He sat in Daddy's chair, which made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't say why, and talked about what a good man Daddy had been, how respected he was, how the community would miss him. Then he said, "I heard about the property situation. That's quite a responsibility for a young girl." Something in the way he said, "young girl," made my skin crawl. But Mama just nodded sadly. "It is. I don't know what my husband was thinking, putting all that on Evelyn's shoulders. She's just 19. What does she know about managing land?" Harold leaned forward, his voice taking on a sympathetic tone. "Well, that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. I'd be happy to help. I know about property management, about dealing with the county offices, about all those complicated legal matters. I could take that burden off Miss Evelyn's shoulders." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Whitmore," I said, trying to be polite. "But I think we'll manage." He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time, and something flickered in those small eyes. Of course. I'm just saying the offer stands. 2 women alone on a property like this? Well, people talk. You know how it is." He came back 3 days later, then again the following week, always with an excuse, bringing something from town, checking to see if we needed anything, offering advice about this or that, and always bringing up the property. How complicated it was. How overwhelming for someone my age. How much easier it would be with a man handling things. Mama started to lean into his visits, started to rely on his advice, started to say things like, Well, Mr. Whitmore says we should, or according to Mr. Whitmore. After about a month of this, the church ladies started talking to Mama. I'd see them clustered around her after Sunday service, whispering, glancing over at me. Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Kimball, Mrs. Howell, the self-appointed guardians of community morality. One Sunday, Mrs. Patterson came right up to me. "Evelyn, dear, you know people are starting to talk." "Talk about what, Mrs. Patterson?" "Well, about you and your mother living alone on that property. A young girl with assets like that, it's not proper, it's not safe. You need a husband to protect you." "I'm doing just fine, ma'am." She pursed her lips. "Mr. Whitmore is a good man, a godly man. If he's showing interest in your situation, you should be grateful. A girl in your position can't afford to be choosy." That's when I started to understand what was happening. This wasn't just Harold being helpful. This was orchestrated. The visits, the advice, the church ladies suddenly so concerned about my welfare. It was all leading somewhere. 2 months after Daddy died, Harold asked to speak to Mama privately. They went into the kitchen while I stayed in the living room, trying to hear through the thin walls but catching only murmurs. When they came back out, Mama looked relieved and Harold looked satisfied. "Evelyn, sit down, honey. Mr. Whitmore has something to ask you." My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. Harold cleared his throat. "Miss Evelyn, I've been giving a lot of thought to your situation. You're a fine young woman from a good family, but you're in a difficult position. Your father left you with responsibilities you're not equipped to handle. And it's not right, a young unmarried woman with property. People talk. It reflects poorly on you and on your dear mother." I said nothing, just stared at him. "So I'd like to offer you a solution. I'm asking for your hand in marriage. I can provide for you and your mother. I can manage the property properly. I can give you the protection and guidance a young woman needs. Your father would have wanted you taken care of, and I can do that." It wasn't a proposal. It was a business transaction. He didn't say he loved me. Didn't say he even liked me particularly. Just laid out the practical benefits like he was selling me a sack of feed. "I don't want to get married," I said quietly. "I'm only 19. I want to—" "What you want isn't the issue here," Mama interrupted, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "This is about what's proper, what's right, what's best for everyone." "But Mama—" "No buts, Evelyn May. Mr. Whitmore is offering you a good life, security, respectability. Do you understand how lucky you are? A man of his standing, willing to take on a girl with no real prospects? I have prospects. I have Daddy's land. I can—" "You can what?" Harold's voice was cold now. "Run a farm by yourself? At 19? Don't be ridiculous. You need a man to handle these things. That's just how the world works." Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure increased. Reverend Caldwell came to visit and told me it was God's plan for women to be under the authority of a husband. The church ladies told Mama what a blessing this was. The neighbors started treating me differently, like I was being difficult, like I was causing problems by not immediately accepting. Mama pulled me aside one night, tears in her eyes. "Evelyn, please, I'm scared. I don't know how to manage this property. I don't know how to handle the bills, the taxes, the legal things. Mr. Whitmore can help us. And if you don't marry him, people are going to start saying terrible things. They'll say you're improper. They'll say you're ungrateful. They'll make our lives miserable. But I don't love him, Mama." "Love?" She looked at me like I'd said something absurd. "Honey, love comes later. Or it doesn't, but you learn to live with it. Marriage isn't about feelings. It's about security. It's about doing what's right. And this is right. Daddy left the land to me because he trusted me. Your daddy was a good man, but he made a mistake putting that burden on you. He should have known better. Now we're in this situation, and Mr. Whitmore is the answer. Please, Evelyn, please don't be stubborn about this." I felt trapped, cornered. Every direction I turned, someone was telling me I had no choice, that this was what had to happen, that refusing was selfish, childish, sinful even. Finally, worn down and exhausted, I said yes. Not because I wanted to, not because I chose to, but because I felt like I had no other option. Because everyone was telling me this was the only way. Because at 19, I didn't know how to stand up against the entire weight of my community, my church, and my own mother. The wedding was set for May, 3 months after Daddy's death. Quick, people said, but appropriate given the circumstances. I went through the motions like a ghost. Mama sewed a simple white dress. The church ladies planned a small reception in the church basement. Harold made all the arrangements with the courthouse, with the preacher, with everything. I just had to show up and say, I do. The night before the wedding, I sat on my bed and cried. I looked around the little room where I'd grown up, at Daddy's land visible through the window, and I felt like I was saying goodbye to everything I'd ever known, everything I'd ever been. Mama came in and sat beside me. Tomorrow's a big day. You should get some sleep. Mama, I'm scared. Every bride is scared, honey. That's natural. But Mr. Whitmore is a good man. He'll take care of you. You'll see. But he wasn't a good man, and he wasn't going to take care of me. He was going to try to destroy me. I just didn't know it yet. The wedding was on a Saturday morning in May of 1967. It was a small ceremony at the church with maybe 30 people there, mostly church members, a few neighbors, Harold's business associates. I wore the white dress Mama had sewn, carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Mrs. Patterson had picked that morning, and felt absolutely nothing. I was numb all the way through. Reverend Caldwell performed the ceremony. He talked about submission and duty and God's design for marriage. He told me to honor and obey. He told Harold to lead and provide. When it came time to say I do, the words stuck in my throat for a moment. But Mama was sitting in the front pew with tears in her eyes, and Harold's hand was gripping mine so tight it hurt, and everyone was waiting, so I said it. I do. And just like that, I wasn't Evelyn May Collins anymore. I was Mrs. Harold Whitmore. His wife, his property, in every way that mattered in 1967 Kentucky. The reception was punch and cake in the church basement. Harold stood beside me accepting congratulations, his hand possessive on my lower back. People told him how lucky he was, told me how blessed I was, told us both what a fine Christian couple we made. Nobody asked me if I was happy. Nobody seemed to notice that I barely spoke, barely smiled. Or if they did notice, they probably thought it was just nerves. Just a young bride overwhelmed by the magnitude of her new role. We didn't go on a honeymoon. Harold said we couldn't afford to close the store for that long. Instead, we drove straight from the church to his house. My house now, I guess. A tidy little 2-story on Maple Street, 3 blocks from the store. He'd lived there alone since his father died 5 years before. It was neat and orderly in that way of spaces where a solitary man has established his routines and doesn't want them disturbed. Everything had its place. Everything was exactly how he wanted it. He showed me around quickly. Kitchen, parlor, 2 bedrooms upstairs, bathroom with actual indoor plumbing, which was supposed to impress me. Then he told me to change out of my wedding dress and make us some lunch. I have to go to the store for a few hours. There's food in the icebox. I'll be back by 3. And he left. Left me standing there in his house on our wedding day, alone, expected to just start being a wife, like flipping a switch. I changed into a regular dress, explored the kitchen, found some cold chicken and bread, and made sandwiches. When he came back at 3, he ate without comment, then told me to clean up while he went through some paperwork in his office. That was our wedding day. No romance, no tenderness, just immediate expectation that I'd slip into the role he'd assigned me. That first week, I tried to make the best of it, tried to be the good wife everyone expected me to be. I cooked his meals, cleaned his house, did his laundry, tried to ask him about his day, tried to have conversations. But Harold wasn't interested in conversations. He was interested in efficiency. "Don't ask me about things that don't concern you," he'd say when I tried to talk about the store or town business. "Women don't need to worry about such matters." On the 4th day of our marriage, he brought home a stack of papers. "These are the property documents from your father's estate. I need you to sign them." I looked through them, trying to understand the legal language. "What are these exactly?" "Transfer documents, putting the property in my name as the head of household. That's how it should be. Your father made a mistake putting them in your name. We're correcting that now." Something in my gut clenched. But Daddy wanted the property in my name. Harold's face hardened. "Your daddy's dead, Evelyn, and you're married now. Everything you own becomes mine by law anyway. This is just making it official. Now sign." "I'd like to read through them first, maybe show them to—" He slammed his hand on the table, making me jump. "You'll sign them now." "I'm not asking. Women don't understand legal documents. You'll just confuse yourself. I'm trying to protect you and you're being difficult." My hands shook as I picked up the pen, but something made me stop. "I want to wait. I want to think about it." The look he gave me then, I'll never forget it. Pure, cold fury. "We'll discuss this later, when you're being more reasonable." He took the papers and locked them in his desk. That night at dinner, he didn't speak to me at all, gave me the silent treatment like I was a child being punished. Over the next few weeks, the control got tighter. He started going through my things, deciding what clothes I could wear. "That dress is too short, too tight, too bright. You're a married woman now. You dress modestly." He threw away half my wardrobe and told me I'd wear what he approved. He controlled the money completely, gave me a tiny allowance for groceries, made me account for every penny. "You don't need money of your own. That's how women get ideas. I'll handle all finances." He decided when I could leave the house. "Where do you think you're going? To see your mother? You just saw her Sunday. You don't need to run over there every time you feel lonely. Your place is here." He monitored who I talked to. "I saw you chatting with Mrs. Henderson at church. What were you discussing? Why were you laughing? Married women don't need girlfriends. You have me now." He even controlled what I read. Found me with a library book one day and said, "What's this? Romance novels? That's trash that puts foolish ideas in women's heads. You don't need to read anymore. You have housework to do." Every day, he'd say things designed to make me doubt myself, make me feel small. "You're lucky I married you. No other man would have taken on a burden like you. You don't know how to do anything right. How did your mother raise you? Stop crying. You're always crying. You're too emotional, too sensitive. That's your problem. If you just do what I say without questioning, we'd get along fine, but you have to be difficult." At night, in bed, there was no gentleness, no asking if I was okay. Just him taking what he considered his marital right, and me lying there feeling like I was disappearing a little more each time. After 2 months of marriage, I barely recognized myself. The girl who'd loved school, who'd dreamed of maybe teaching, who'd loved to read and think. She was gone. In her place was this hollow shell who just tried to get through each day without making Harold angry. Mama would ask me how I was when I saw her at church. "Fine," I'd say, because what else could I say? That I'd made a terrible mistake? That I was miserable? That would just make her feel guilty and it wouldn't change anything. Marriage was forever. I'd made my bed, as they say. Then one day, about 3 months into the marriage, I needed to get something from Harold's desk drawer. He'd asked me to find some receipts. The drawer was locked, but I knew he kept a key in the kitchen. I found it, opened the drawer, saw the receipts right on top, but underneath them was a folder, a manila folder with my name on it. I knew I shouldn't look, knew Harold would be furious if he caught me. But my hands moved on their own, opening that folder, pulling out the papers inside. And that's when my world exploded. Because what I found in that folder was proof that Harold hadn't just married me to control my property. He'd married me to steal it completely. And his plan was so much worse than I could have imagined. He was going to have me declared insane. He was going to have me locked away in a mental institution. And once I was gone, everything I owned would be his. The papers were all there. Medical evaluations I'd never participated in. Psychiatric reports I'd never given. Diagnosis of conditions I didn't have. All signed by Dr. Morrison, Harold's friend from church. And at the bottom of the stack, a commitment form. Already filled out. Ready to be filed. Patient name, Evelyn May Whitmore. Diagnosis, severe emotional instability with risk of harm to self and others. Recommended treatment, immediate psychiatric hospitalization at Central State Hospital. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. But I read every single one, forcing myself to absorb what I was seeing. This was why he'd married me. This was the plan all along. Get legal control through marriage, then get rid of me completely through institutionalization. It was perfect, legal, respectable even, a concerned husband taking care of his troubled young wife. And in 1967 Kentucky, it would absolutely work. All he needed was one doctor's signature, and my fate was sealed. I was putting the papers back with trembling hands when I heard the front door open. Harold was home early. I heard his footsteps coming through the living room, heading toward the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest. The folder was still open on the desk, papers scattered where I'd been reading them. The key was still in the drawer lock. I grabbed the papers, tried to shove them back in the folder in some kind of order, my hands shaking so badly I kept dropping them. Got the folder closed, got it back in the drawer, turned the key, pulled it out of the lock. "Evelyn? Where are you?" "In here." My voice came out high and strange. "In the office. You asked me to find those receipts." I shoved the key in my dress pocket just as he appeared in the doorway. He looked at me, standing there by his desk, at the receipts I was clutching in my hand, and his eyes narrowed. "Did you find them?" "Yes, right here." I held them out, praying he couldn't see how badly my hands were shaking. He took them, glanced at them, then looked at the desk, at the drawer, at me. "Was the drawer locked?" "Yes, sir. You told me where the key was, remember? Last week you said if I ever needed something from your desk, the key was in the kitchen drawer by the sink." I don't know where that lie came from. He'd never told me that, but I said it with such conviction that he seemed to accept it, though suspicion still lingered in his eyes. "All right, you can go start dinner now. I have work to do in here." I left quickly, went to the kitchen, started pulling out pots and pans with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. I could hear him in the office, could picture him checking that drawer, making sure everything was where it should be. While I cooked, I don't even remember what I made that night. My mind was racing. Those papers were real. The plan was real. He was really going to do this to me. The question wasn't if, it was when. How long did I have? Days? Weeks? The commitment form hadn't been dated yet. Maybe he was waiting for the right moment, building up some kind of case, getting his ducks in a row. Or maybe I'd just accelerated his timeline by nearly getting caught snooping. Dinner that night was torture. I sat across from Harold, watching him eat, seeing him completely differently now. This wasn't just a controlling husband. This wasn't just an unhappy marriage. This was a predator who'd carefully stalked and trapped his prey and now was preparing to destroy me completely. "You're quiet tonight," he said, looking at me over his coffee cup. "Just tired. You're always tired lately, always complaining about something. Headaches, tiredness, crying spells." He said it deliberately, each word careful. "It's concerning. A woman your age shouldn't be so frail." And that's when I understood. He was building the narrative right now, right in front of me. Every time I showed any emotion, any sign of stress, any normal human reaction to being controlled and belittled, he was using it, building evidence of my instability. "I'm fine. Just need more sleep, I think." Well, I've been thinking maybe you should see Dr. Morrison. Get checked out. Make sure nothing's wrong." My blood went cold. "That's not necessary. I'm fine." "I insist. In fact, I already made you an appointment. Thursday at 2 o'clock. 3 days away. He'd already made the appointment. The trap was closing faster than I'd thought. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to him snore, and I felt more terrified than I'd ever felt in my life. Going to Dr. Morrison was dangerous. He was part of the plan. Whatever happened at that appointment, it would be twisted to support Harold's narrative. If I cried, I was emotionally unstable. If I didn't cry, I was emotionally detached. If I protested, I was combative. If I stayed quiet, I was withdrawn. There was no way to win. The game was rigged from the start. The next morning, after Harold left for the store, I walked over to Mama's house. She was in the kitchen, washing dishes, and smiled when she saw me come in. "Evelyn, what a nice surprise. Want some coffee?" "Mama, I need to talk to you about something important." She dried her hands and sat down at the table with me. I told her everything, about the papers I'd found, about the commitment plan, about Dr. Morrison being involved, about Harold's real reasons for marrying me. I watched her face change as I talked. Confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked like fear. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she said, "Evelyn, that's a very serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, Mama. I saw the papers. I read them. It's all real." "Are you sure you didn't misunderstand? Maybe those papers were from his first wife or something, from years ago, and you just got confused?" "Mama, they had my name on them, my current name, Evelyn May Whitmore. There's no confusion." She twisted her hands together, looking distressed. "But Harold is a deacon. He's a respected businessman. Why would he do something like that?" "For the property, for Daddy's land. He can't get it any other way because Daddy put it in my name. But if I'm declared insane and committed, he gets control of everything. I can't believe he'd—" She trailed off, and I could see her struggling with it. "What do you want me to do?" "Help me. Come with me to the sheriff, or to a lawyer, someone who can stop this." Mama's face went pale. "Evelyn, I can't do that. Accuse your husband of something like this? The scandal would destroy us both. And what if you're wrong? What if there's an explanation?" "I'm not wrong. Mama, please, you have to believe me." She stood up, agitated, wringing her hands. "You're putting me in an impossible position. Harold is your husband. You're supposed to trust him, submit to him. If you're having troubles in your marriage, that's between you and him and God. I can't interfere. He's going to lock me away. Don't you understand that?" "Maybe." She hesitated, looked at me with something like pity. "Maybe you do need to see Dr. Morrison. Maybe you're not handling the stress of marriage well. You've been so anxious and upset lately. Maybe Harold sees something we don't see. Maybe he's trying to help you." I felt like she'd slapped me. "You think I'm crazy too? I think you're overwhelmed. I think you've been under a lot of strain since your father died. I think maybe some medical attention might help you adjust to married life." I stood up, backing away from her. "You're not going to help me." "Evelyn, honey, you're going to let him do this to me. You're going to stand by and let him lock me up and take everything Daddy left me. And you're going to tell yourself, it's for my own good. That's not fair. I'm trying to do what's right here. You're trying to protect yourself." The words came out harsh, but true. "Because if you help me, if you stand with me, the church ladies will turn on you too. You'll be ostracized. It's easier to just believe I'm the problem." She started crying. "I don't know what you want from me." I wanted my mother to protect me, but I see now that's not going to happen. I left her house and walked back slowly, my last hope gone. Mama wasn't going to help. She was too scared, too conditioned to defer to male authority, too worried about her own position in the community. I was completely alone. That afternoon, I started planning. Not planning to fight. I knew I couldn't win a fight. The system was rigged against me. A young woman's word against a respected businessman and a doctor? In 1967 Kentucky? I'd lose before I even started. No, I started planning to run. It seemed impossible. I had no money. Harold controlled everything. I had no car. He drove me anywhere I needed to go. I had nowhere to go. No family who'd take me in, no friends I could trust with something this big. But I also knew I had no choice. Stay and be institutionalized, or run and take my chances. When Harold came home that evening, I acted as normal as I could, made dinner, cleaned up, didn't mention the appointment with Dr. Morrison that was now 2 days away. But that night, after he fell asleep, I got up quietly, went to his pants where he'd draped them over the chair. Carefully, slowly, I reached into the pocket and pulled out his wallet. There was $43 in it. I took 20, enough to maybe buy a bus ticket somewhere, but not so much he'd immediately notice it missing. Put the wallet back exactly where it was. Went to the kitchen and packed a small bag with food that wouldn't spoil. Some bread, some cheese, some apples. Hid it in the back of the closet. Found my daddy's old suitcase in the attic and hid it behind the winter coats. The next day, while Harold was at work, I went through the house carefully. Took a change of clothes, some underwear, a warm sweater, packed them in the suitcase and hid it with the food. I was doing this. I was really going to do this. Thursday morning arrived, the day of the appointment with Dr. Morrison, the day that would start the process of having me committed. I got dressed, made breakfast, watched Harold eat. "Ready for your appointment this afternoon?" he asked. "Yes," I lied, but I wasn't going to that appointment, because Thursday afternoon, while Harold thought I was at Dr. A. Morrison's office being evaluated for insanity, I was going to be on a bus heading far, far away from there. I just had to survive until then. Wednesday night, the night before the appointment, I barely slept at all. I lay there in the dark next to Harold, listening to his steady breathing, watching the shadows on the ceiling, and feeling terror wash over me in waves. Tomorrow was supposed to be the day. 2:00 appointment with Dr. Morrison. Harold was planning to drive me there himself, make sure I showed up. Once I was in that office, the wheels would start turning. Dr. Morrison would do whatever examination Harold had paid him to do, write whatever report Harold wanted written. And then, maybe not immediately, but soon, the commitment papers would be filed. I'd heard stories about those state hospitals. Everyone had. Overcrowded, understaffed places where people went in and rarely came out the same. Where they gave you drugs to keep you quiet, electric shocks to cure you, locked you in rooms when you got difficult, where your family could just leave you and forget about you. My own great-aunt had been sent to one back in the 30s. The family said she'd had nervous problems. Last anyone heard, she was still there, but nobody had visited in years. Just easier to pretend she didn't exist. That's what would happen to me. Harold would visit once or twice at first, for appearances. Then the visits would taper off. People would say what a shame it was, what a burden for poor Mr. Whitmore, how he'd tried so hard to help his troubled young wife. Eventually, people would stop asking about me at all, and Harold would have everything. The property, the house, complete freedom. Maybe he'd even remarry eventually. Find another young woman with something he wanted. Around 3 a.m, I heard Harold get up to use the bathroom. I closed my eyes, kept my breathing steady, pretended to be asleep. Heard him come back, settle into bed, his weight making the mattress dip. Then, just as I thought he'd gone back to sleep, he spoke into the darkness. "You know what tomorrow is." My heart nearly stopped. I didn't answer, kept pretending to sleep. "I know you're awake, Evelyn. I can tell by your breathing." I opened my eyes. "I know, the doctor's appointment." "Are you nervous?" "A little." "You shouldn't be. Dr. Morrison is a good doctor. He's going to help you." There was something in his voice. Satisfaction, maybe, or anticipation. "You've been struggling, Evelyn. Anyone can see that. The crying, the anxiety, the way you question everything I tell you. That's not normal for a wife." I said nothing, just stared at the dark ceiling. "The doctor is going to evaluate you properly, and whatever he recommends, we're going to follow his advice, because I care about you. I want you to get better." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, If I hadn't seen those papers, I might have almost believed him, might have thought he really did care, really was trying to help. What if there's nothing wrong with me? I asked quietly. Then the doctor will say so. But Evelyn, there is something wrong. You're not adjusting to married life the way a normal woman should. You're resistant, emotional, unstable. Those are signs of a deeper problem. Or signs that I'm unhappy. The words came out before I could stop them. I felt Harold go rigid beside me. Unhappy? What do you have to be unhappy about? I've given you everything. A nice house, financial security, respectability. You're a married woman with a husband who provides for you. That's more than most women get. You don't love me. Love? He said it like it was a foreign word. Love is a fairy tale young girls believe in. Marriage is about duty, responsibility, proper roles. I do my duty as a husband. You need to learn to do your duty as a wife. And if I can't, then you need help. Professional help, which is exactly what we're getting you tomorrow. He rolled over then, turning his back to me, done with the conversation. Within minutes, his breathing evened out into sleep. But I stayed awake, staring into the darkness, and a cold certainty settled over me. This was it. This was my last night in this house. Tomorrow, I was either going to escape, or I was going to lose everything. My freedom, my property, my future, maybe my life. The next morning, I got up and went through my routine like it was any other day. Made coffee, made breakfast, cleaned up. Harold left for the store at 8:30, saying he'd be back at 1:30 to take me to the appointment. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I went into action. I retrieved the suitcase I'd hidden, checked to make sure I had everything. The change of clothes, the food, the $20 I'd taken from Harold's wallet. Added a few more things. My mama's photo, my daddy's pocket watch that I'd kept hidden from Harold, the deed to the property that I'd managed to find and tuck away. That deed was important. It was proof the land was mine. If I was going to run, I was taking that proof with me. I changed into my plainest dress, the one that would help me blend in, pinned my hair back simply. No jewelry, nothing that would draw attention. I needed to look like a nobody, just another woman traveling. At noon, I wrote 2 letters. One to Mama, telling her I was sorry, but I had to go. That I loved her, but I couldn't stay and let Harold destroy me. That I hoped someday she'd understand. The other, to Harold, shorter. I'm not sick. I'm not crazy. I just want to be free. Don't look for me. I left both letters on the kitchen table. Then I picked up my suitcase, took one last look around the house, this place that was supposed to be my home but had only ever been my prison, and walked out the door. It was 12:15. Harold would be back in a little over an hour. I needed to be far away by then. The bus station was downtown, about a 1.5-mile walk. I'd timed it earlier in the week, pretending I was just going to the market. 15 minutes at a normal pace, maybe 20 with a suitcase. I walked fast, head down, praying I wouldn't run into anyone who knew me, praying no one would stop me to chat, ask where I was going with that suitcase. Main Street was busy with lunch hour traffic. I kept to the side streets where I could, cutting through alleys, taking the long way to avoid passing directly by Harold's store. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every time I heard a car, I was sure it was him. Sure he'd come back early, found the letters, was hunting for me. But I kept walking, kept moving, one foot in front of the other. The bus station was a small building on the edge of downtown. Just a ticket window, a few benches, and a schedule board on the wall. When I walked in, there was only one other person there, an old man sleeping on a bench with his hat over his face. I went to the window. "When's the next bus out of town?" The clerk, a middle-aged woman with cat-eye glasses, looked up from her magazine. "Where you headed?" "Anywhere. What's the next bus leaving?" She raised an eyebrow but checked her schedule. "Lexington. Leaves at 1:15. That's in 20 minutes. I'll take a ticket. One way or round trip?" "One way." She looked at me more carefully then, taking in my plain dress, my hastily packed suitcase, my nervous energy. I could see her putting it together. Young woman, traveling alone, one-way ticket, looking over her shoulder. "That'll be $6.50. I handed over the money with shaking hands. She gave me the ticket and a long look. "Bus'll board in about 10 minutes. You can wait over there." I sat on one of the hard benches, clutching my suitcase and my ticket, watching the clock on the wall tick forward with agonizing slowness. 1 o'clock, 1:05, 1:10. At 1:12, a car pulled up outside, a green Chevrolet, Harold's car. My blood turned to ice. I watched through the window as he got out, looked around the parking lot, started toward the station door. He'd figured it out. Come home early, found the letters. Known exactly where I'd go. The clerk saw him too. She looked at me, at him, then back at me. And in that moment, I saw understanding in her eyes, saw her make a decision. She stood up and walked to the door, stepping outside just as Harold reached for the handle. "Help you, sir?" "I'm looking for my wife." "Young woman, brown hair, might be carrying a suitcase?" "Haven't seen anyone like that. Just been me and old Charlie in there all afternoon." "You're sure?" "Positive. But there's another bus station over on 5th Street. Maybe try there?" There was no bus station on 5th Street. She was sending him on a wild goose chase. Harold looked frustrated but got back in his car and drove off. The clerk came back inside, looked at me. "Your bus is here. Better get on quick." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much." She nodded. "Good luck, honey. Whatever you're running from, I hope you make it." I grabbed my suitcase and ran for the bus. I climbed onto that Greyhound bus with my legs shaking so badly I could barely manage the steps. The driver, a heavy-set man with gray hair and kind eyes, took my ticket and nodded toward the back. "Find yourself a seat, miss. We'll be pulling out in just a minute." I walked down the narrow aisle, past a few scattered passengers, a woman with 2 small children, a businessman reading a newspaper, a young soldier in uniform sleeping against the window. I chose a seat near the back, on the side away from the station, and pressed myself against the window, making myself as small as possible. Every second that bus sat there felt like an eternity. I kept watching the parking lot through the window, terrified I'd see that green Chevrolet come racing back. Kept imagining Harold bursting onto the bus, dragging me off, everyone watching as he told them his poor, disturbed wife had run away and needed to be taken home for her own safety. But the minutes ticked by. The driver closed the door. The engine rumbled to life. And then we were moving, pulling out of the station, onto the street, leaving town. I watched through the window as we passed familiar landmarks. The hardware store where Daddy used to buy supplies. The church where I'd been married just 3 months ago. The road that led out to Mama's house. Everything I'd ever known. Everything that had made up my whole world for 21 years, rolling past and disappearing behind us. I started crying then. Quiet tears that just streamed down my face while I kept my hand pressed over my mouth to muffle any sound. I cried for my daddy, who'd tried so hard to protect me by leaving me that property. Cried for my mama who loved me but couldn't help me. Cried for the girl I'd been who'd thought her life would be simple and safe. The woman across the aisle noticed. She was maybe in her 40s, wearing a practical navy dress and sensible shoes. She leaned over and said quietly, "You okay, honey?" I nodded, wiping at my face with my sleeve. "Yes, ma'am. Just leaving home is harder than I thought it would be." She smiled sympathetically. "First time traveling alone?" "Yes, ma'am." "Well, you'll be all right. We women are tougher than we think." She settled back into her seat, and I was grateful she didn't ask more questions. The bus rolled through the Kentucky countryside, past farms and small towns, through landscapes that looked just like home but weren't home. With each mile that passed, I felt the tight band of fear around my chest loosen just a little. Harold didn't know where I was, couldn't follow me. By the time he figured out which bus I'd taken, I'd be long gone. We stopped in a few small towns along the way. People got on and off. I kept my head down, didn't make eye contact with anyone. Just a nobody. Just another passenger. That's all I wanted to be. It took about 3 hours to reach Lexington. When we pulled into the station there, I had no idea what to do next. I got off the bus with my small suitcase, stood in the station, and looked around at this unfamiliar city that was bigger than any place I'd ever been. I had about $13 left, not nearly enough to live on for long. I needed to find work, fast. Needed a place to stay, needed to figure out how to survive on my own. The station had a payphone on the wall. I stood there looking at it for a long time, thinking about calling Mama, letting her know I was safe, that I'd made it out. But I knew better. Harold would be watching her, waiting to see if I made contact, and Mama might feel obligated to tell him where I was. She'd see it as her Christian duty to help him find his troubled wife. No, I couldn't risk it. I walked out of the station into the evening air. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. I had to find somewhere to sleep tonight. Tomorrow I could look for work, but tonight I just needed safety. I walked around downtown for a while, past shops that were closing, past restaurants where people were having dinner, past office buildings emptying out for the day. I felt so lost, so alone, so completely out of my depth. That's when I saw it. A sign in a window, boarding house for women, clean rooms, reasonable rates. I went up to the door and knocked. A woman answered, tall, thin, probably in her 60s, with steel gray hair in a bun and sharp blue eyes that took me in immediately. Help you? I saw your sign. About rooms? You looking for a place to stay? Yes, ma'am. Just temporary, until I find work. She looked me over carefully, saw my cheap suitcase, my plain dress, my red eyes from crying. You running from something, girl? I hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. Bad marriage, ma'am. Needed to get out. She nodded slowly. No judgment here. Half the women in this house have similar stories. I'm Mrs. Crawford. You got any money? A little, not much. Well, I can give you 1 week, room and breakfast included. After that, you'll need to pay or find somewhere else. $3 for the week. Can you manage that? Yes, ma'am. Good. Come on in. The boarding house was old but clean, with worn furniture and the smell of cooking cabbage. Mrs. Crawford showed me to a small room on the 2nd floor, just big enough for a narrow bed, a dresser, and a chair. But it had a door that locked from the inside and a window that looked out over the street, and it was mine. Bathrooms at the end of the hall, shared with 3 other girls. Breakfast is at 7 in the dining room. No men allowed upstairs, no drinking, no loud noise after 9. Break the rules and you're out. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Crawford. She paused at the door, looking at me with something that might have been kindness. What's your name, girl? I almost said Evelyn Whitmore, but caught myself. That was Harold's name. I didn't want to be her anymore. Evelyn Collins, I said, using my maiden name, my real name. Well, Evelyn Collins, welcome to Crawford House. You look like you've had a hard day. Get some rest. Things will look clearer in the morning. After she left, I sat on the bed and just breathed. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. I'd escaped. But the relief was mixed with terror because I had no idea what came next. I had almost no money, no job, no skills except housekeeping and cooking. I was in a strange city where I didn't know anyone. And somewhere back in Kentucky, Harold was probably turning the town upside down looking for me. Would he call the police? Report me missing? Or would he quietly tell people I'd had a breakdown and been taken somewhere for treatment? Would people believe him? I pulled out my daddy's pocket watch from my suitcase and held it in my hands. It was the only thing I had left of him, besides the property deed that I couldn't even access anymore. The watch ticked steadily, reassuringly, and I remembered him telling me once, Time keeps moving forward, Evelyn. No matter what happens, time keeps moving. I had to keep moving forward too. Had to be braver than I felt, stronger than I thought I was. That night, I lay in that unfamiliar bed in that unfamiliar room and made myself a promise. I wasn't going to just survive. I was going to build a real life. A life that was mine, on my own terms. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to figure it out. And I was never, ever going back to Harold Whitmore. The next morning, Mrs. Crawford knocked on my door at 6:30. "Breakfast in half an hour, and I've got a lead on a job for you if you're interested." "Yes, ma'am, very interested." "Good. There's a diner 3 blocks from here. Owner's my cousin. He needs a waitress. Pays 60 cents an hour plus tips. It's not much, but it's honest work. 60 cents an hour. That was more money than I'd ever earned in my life. Harold had never let me work, had never given me access to real money. That sounds perfect. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. Go talk to Pete, see if he'll hire you. Tell him Martha Crawford sent you. I got dressed in my one clean dress, tried to make myself look presentable, and walked to the diner with hope fluttering in my chest like a small, fragile bird. Pete's Diner was a busy place, even at 8 in the morning. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Men in work clothes sat at the counter reading newspapers. A few families occupied the booths. Pete was a burly man with a stained apron and a no-nonsense attitude. "Martha says you need work." "Yes, sir. I'm a hard worker. I learn fast." "You ever waited tables?" "No, sir, but I've cooked and served for people before." He looked me over. "You look young. You in some kind of trouble?" "No, sir. Just trying to start over." He studied me for another moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll give you a try. 6 to 2, Monday through Saturday, 60 cents an hour, keep your own tips. Don't steal, don't sass the customers, show up on time. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Good. You start tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." I walked back to the boarding house, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I had a place to stay, I had a job, I had a chance. And Harold Whitmore was 100 miles away, with no idea where I was. For the first time since I'd said I do in that church 3 months ago, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. Those first few months in Lexington were the hardest and the best of my entire life. Hard because everything was unfamiliar, because I was learning to be independent for the first time, because I jumped at every sound thinking it might be Harold come to drag me back. But also the best, because for the first time ever, I was making my own choices, earning my own money, living by my own rules. Working at Pete's Diner was exhausting. I'd get up at 5 in the morning, walk the 3 blocks in the dark, and start my shift at 6. The morning rush was intense, construction workers wanting coffee and eggs before their shifts, businessmen grabbing breakfast before heading to their offices, truck drivers stopping in for a hot meal. My feet would ache, my back would hurt, and by the end of my shift at 2 o'clock, I'd be completely worn out. But I loved it. Loved the independence of it. Loved earning my own money. Those dollar bills and coins that customers left as tips were mine. All mine. Nobody could tell me what to do with them. Nobody could take them away. Pete was gruff, but fair. He yelled when orders got backed up, but he also showed me the ropes, taught me how to balance 3 plates at once, how to remember orders without writing everything down, how to handle difficult customers with a smile, even when you wanted to throw coffee in their faces. "Service industry's not for the weak, Evelyn," he'd say. "But it's honest work, and there's no shame in it." The other waitress, Ruby, was a woman in her 40s with bleached blonde hair and bright red lipstick. She took me under her wing immediately. "You're running from something," she said matter-of-factly on my 3rd day. It wasn't a question. I froze. "What makes you say that?" "Honey, I've been working diners for 20 years. I can spot a runaway wife from a mile away. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell anyone. Half the women I've worked with over the years were running from something. Bad husbands, mostly. sometimes bad families, sometimes just bad situations. He was going to have me committed, I heard myself say, to a mental hospital, so he could take my property. Ruby's face hardened. Son of a bitch. Well, you did the right thing getting out. Don't you ever go back, you hear me? Men like that don't change, they just get worse. Having Ruby on my side made everything easier. She taught me which customers tipped well and which ones were cheapskates, which ones tried to grab your rear when you walked by, and how to avoid them. How to stretch your tips to make them last. After work each day, I'd walk back to Mrs. Crawford's boarding house, exhausted but satisfied. I'd count my tips in my room, hiding the money in different places, some in my suitcase, some in my pillowcase, some in the toe of my extra shoes. I was saving every penny I could, building up a cushion in case I needed to run again. The other women at the boarding house were like me, women trying to make it on their own. Sarah worked at a textile factory. Margaret was a secretary at a law office. Betty did housekeeping for wealthy families. We'd sit together in the common room some evenings, talking, sharing our stories when we felt safe enough to do so. Most of them were divorced or widowed. A few, like me, had just walked away from marriages that were killing them. None of us judged each other. We understood. For the first few months, I lived in constant fear that Harold would find me. Every time I saw a green car, my heart would race. Every time a man in a suit came into the diner, I'd think it might be him or someone he'd sent. I had nightmares where he'd show up with Dr. Morrison and commitment papers, dragging me away while everyone watched and did nothing. But as the months passed and he didn't appear, I started to relax a little. Started to believe that maybe I really had escaped. Maybe he'd decided I wasn't worth the trouble of tracking down. Maybe he'd just told everyone back home that I'd had a breakdown and run off and moved on with his life. I hoped he was miserable, hoped the church ladies were gossiping about him, about how his young wife had left him, hoped it damaged his precious reputation. But mostly, I just hoped he'd leave me alone. After 6 months at Pete's, I asked for more hours. Pete gave me the 2 to 10 shift 3 nights a week in addition to my morning shifts. It meant working almost 60 hours some weeks, meant barely having time to sleep. But it also meant more money, meant building security, meant getting further and further from the helpless girl I'd been. I started taking a class at the public library on Tuesday nights, a basic bookkeeping course taught by a retired accountant. It was free, and I figured if I learned some skills beyond waitressing, maybe I could get a better job someday. The teacher, Mr. Howell, was patient and encouraging. "You have a good head for numbers, Miss Collins," he told me. "You should consider pursuing this further." I started to imagine a future. Maybe I could be a bookkeeper for a small business. Maybe I could work in an office instead of a diner. Maybe I could save enough money to rent a little apartment of my own instead of living in a boarding house. Small dreams, but they were mine. About a year after I'd left Kentucky, I finally worked up the courage to write to Mama. I didn't put a return address on the letter, just told her I was safe, I was working, I was okay. Asked her not to tell Harold if he was still looking for me. Told her I loved her and I was sorry for any pain I'd caused. I never got a response. I don't know if she even received it or if she chose not to write back. That hurt more than I expected it to. But I understood. Mama had to live in that town, had to face those people. Maybe it was easier for her to just pretend I'd never existed. In the spring of 1971, 2 years after I'd escaped, Pete asked me to help train a new waitress. Her name was Linda, and she was 19 years old with a black eye she'd tried to cover with makeup. I recognized that look immediately. The fear, the shame, the exhaustion of trying to hide what was happening to her. On her second day during our break, I took her aside. "Your husband do that to you?" She looked startled, defensive. I walked into a door. "No, you didn't." I said it gently. "And you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But I want you to know, you don't have to go back. There are places you can go, people who'll help." Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't leave. I've got nowhere to go, no money. No. I left with $13 and a suitcase, 2 years ago. I was married to a man who was planning to have me committed so he could steal my inheritance, and I got out. I survived, I built a life. And if I could do it, you can too. She stared at me. Really? Really? It's hard. It's scary. But it's better than staying with someone who hurts you. Linda didn't leave right away. But a few months later, she stopped showing up for shifts. Mrs. Crawford told me later that Linda had come by asking for help, and she'd gotten her into a women's shelter 2 towns over. That made me feel like maybe my own suffering hadn't been for nothing. Like maybe I could use what I'd been through to help other women in the same situation. By 1972, 3 years after my escape, I'd saved up enough money to rent a small efficiency apartment. It was tiny, just 1 room with a kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was mine. I signed the lease with my maiden name, Evelyn Collins, and felt like I'd accomplished something monumental. I bought second-hand furniture from a thrift store, a small table and 2 chairs, a lamp, a radio. Simple things, but they felt like treasures because I'd bought them with my own money, chosen them myself. I learned to cook for one, learned to come home to an empty apartment and feel peaceful instead of lonely. Learned to make decisions without asking permission from anyone. I learned who Evelyn Collins was, separate from being someone's daughter or someone's wife. And I discovered I actually liked her. She was stronger than I'd thought, braver, more capable. Pete promoted me to shift manager in 1973. It came with a raise and more responsibility. I was managing other waitresses, handling difficult situations, even helping with the bookkeeping using the skills I'd learned from Mr. Howell. "You've come a long way, Evelyn," Pete told me. "When you first walked in here 4 years ago, you looked like a scared rabbit. Now look at you, running half my operation." I had come a long way, from a terrified girl fleeing in the night to a woman with a job, an apartment, a life. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I was young, but it was a good life, an honest life, a free life. And nobody, not Harold, not the church ladies, not anyone, could take it away from me. Sometimes I'd think about the property back in Kentucky, my daddy's land, the house he'd built. All of it probably in Harold's hands now, though I had no way of knowing for sure. That hurt. Hurt to think of him getting what he wanted after all, just in a different way than he'd planned. But I consoled myself with this thought. He'd gotten the property, but he hadn't gotten me. Hadn't broken me, hadn't destroyed me, hadn't locked me away. I'd survived, and in surviving, I'd won. That was enough. It had to be enough. I lived in Lexington for almost 30 years. 30 years of building a life that was completely mine. And they were good years, for the most part. Not easy, never easy, but good. I met Thomas in 1976, 7 years after I'd left Kentucky. He was a regular at the diner, came in every Saturday morning for coffee and eggs. He was a mechanic, owned his own shop, and he had kind eyes and a gentle way about him that reminded me a little of my daddy. He asked me out 6 times before I finally said yes. I was so afraid, you see. Afraid of trusting a man again. Afraid of losing the independence I'd fought so hard to build. Afraid that any man I let into my life would try to control me the way Harold had. But Thomas was patient. We dated for 3 years before he even brought up marriage, and when he did, he made sure I knew it was my choice. "Evelyn, I love you. I'd be honored if you'd be my wife, but I also know you've got reasons to be cautious. So if you want to just keep things as they are, that's fine with me. I'm not going anywhere." We got married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse in 1979. I was 31 years old, wearing a yellow dress I'd bought myself, marrying a man I'd chosen. It felt completely different from that first wedding in the church basement. This time, when I said "I do," I meant it with my whole heart. Thomas never tried to control me, never asked me to quit my job, never demanded I account for my money or my time. We were partners in the truest sense. We bought a small house together, saved money together, made decisions together. When we disagreed about something, we talked it through until we found a solution we could both live with. He knew about Harold. I'd told him everything before we got married. Felt like he deserved to know what he was getting into. His response was to pull me into a hug and say, "That man was a fool, and I'm glad you got away from him." We never had children. I'm not sure why. Maybe it just wasn't meant to be. Or maybe some part of me was still too damaged from those years with Harold to fully let go and trust in the future. But Thomas never blamed me for it, never made me feel like I was failing him. "We've got each other," he'd say. "That's enough for me." I never went back to Kentucky. Not once in all those years. I was too afraid of running into Harold, too afraid of stirring up the past. Mama died in 1982, and I didn't even go to the funeral. That broke my heart, but I couldn't risk it. Sent flowers anonymously and cried alone in my kitchen, grieving for the mother who'd loved me but hadn't been strong enough to save me. I heard news from Kentucky occasionally through people who'd moved to Lexington from that area. Heard that Harold had remarried a few years after I left, another young woman, though that marriage didn't last long either. She left him too, apparently. Heard that his business had declined, that he'd lost money, that his reputation had suffered. Good, I thought. I hope he suffered. I hope every single day was miserable for him. In 1998, Thomas got sick. Cancer. We fought it together for 2 years, but in the end, the cancer won. He died in our bedroom, with me holding his hand, and I lost the only man who'd ever truly loved me the right way. His death nearly broke me. After he was gone, I felt lost all over again, like that scared girl who'd arrived in Lexington with $13 and a suitcase. But I'd learned how to survive grief by then. Learned that you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when you don't want to. I kept working at the diner for another 10 years after Thomas died. Pete had retired and his daughter had taken over, but she kept me on because I knew the business inside and out. Finally retired myself in 2010, at 62 years old, after 41 years of waitressing. I sold the house Thomas and I had shared, too many memories, too much emptiness, and moved into a small apartment. Lived simply on my Social Security and the savings I'd built up over the years. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Heard through the grapevine in 2015 that Harold Whitmore had died. He was 87 years old, died alone in a nursing home, no family around him. I tried to feel something, satisfaction, relief, anything. But all I felt was nothing. He'd been dead to me for so long that his actual death didn't change anything. I thought that was the end of it. Thought the story was over. Harold was dead, Mama was dead. Daddy's property was probably sold off or abandoned by now. My old life in Kentucky was completely gone, and my new life in Lexington was winding down into a quiet retirement. But then, last year, I got a letter that changed everything. It came from a law office in Kentucky, forwarded through several addresses before it finally found me. The lawyer explained that they'd been trying to locate me for months, had finally tracked me down through old employment records and Social Security information. They were handling the estate settlement for the property that had been in my father's name. And according to their research, that property had never been legally transferred to anyone else. It was still in my name. Evelyn May Collins. After all these years, it was still legally mine. Harold had tried to take it, apparently. Had filed papers claiming spousal rights, had tried to get me declared legally dead after 7 years of absence. But he'd never completed the process properly. And without my signature or a death certificate, the transfer had never gone through. The property had sat in legal limbo for decades. Taxes had been paid sporadically by Harold while he was alive. Then after he died, it had just sat there, abandoned, unclaimed, waiting. The lawyer wanted to know if I wanted to claim it. Wanted to know if I was interested in finally, officially, taking possession of what my father had left me 57 years ago. I sat in my apartment with that letter in my shaking hands, and I cried. Cried for my daddy, who tried so hard to give me something of my own. Cried for that young girl who'd had to run away from everything to stay free. Cried for all the years in between, all the struggles, all the pain. But I also laughed. Because Harold hadn't won after all. He'd tried so hard to steal my inheritance, had been willing to destroy me to get it, and in the end, he'd failed. The property was still mine, had always been mine, had been sitting there waiting for me all along. I wrote back to the lawyer immediately. Yes, I wanted to claim it. Yes, I wanted what was rightfully mine. The legal process took almost a year. Proving my identity, dealing with decades of abandoned property issues, clearing up the title. But finally, just last month, I received the official deed. Clear title. No encumbrances. The property that my father had left to Evelyn May Collins now officially belonged to Evelyn May Collins Turner. Mine. After everything, it was still mine. I'm 84 years old now. Too old to really do anything with that property. I'll probably sell it or maybe donate it or leave it to some charity in my will. But that's not the point. The point is that I won. I survived. I built a life. And in the end, what was rightfully mine came back to me. Harold Whitmore spent his life trying to control women, trying to take what wasn't his, trying to destroy anyone who stood in his way. And he died alone, bitter, with nothing to show for all that cruelty. I spent my life fighting to be free, to be independent, to be my own person. And I'm sitting here in my apartment, surrounded by things I chose, with a life I built, and a property deed that proves I never stopped being Evelyn May Collins, no matter what name I had to use or where I had to go. That's justice. Not perfect justice, maybe, but justice enough. So here I am, 84 years old, sitting on my small apartment balcony in Lexington, Kentucky, with that property deed in my lap and a lifetime of memories in my heart. The sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I'm thinking about that girl I used to be, that terrified 21-year-old who walked away from everything she'd ever known with nothing but a suitcase and a desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, she could build a life worth living. I did it. Against all the odds, against all the voices that told me I couldn't, against a system that was designed to keep women like me trapped and powerless. I did it. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I was young. I didn't become a teacher like I dreamed, didn't have children, didn't live in that farmhouse my daddy built or work that land he'd left me. Lost so many years to fear and hiding and just trying to survive. But I had 41 years of honest work at Pete's Diner, had 21 years of real marriage with Thomas, a man who loved me as an equal partner, had friendships with women who understood, who'd survived their own versions of what I survived, had the satisfaction of helping other women find their way out of situations like mine. And most importantly, I had my freedom. Nobody owned me. Nobody controlled me. Nobody could tell me what to do or who to be. That property deed sitting in my lap, it's more than just a legal document. It's proof. Proof that my daddy's love and intention to protect me was stronger than Harold's scheme to destroy me. Proof that even when systems are rigged against you, even when everyone tells you you have no choice, sometimes justice finds a way. Harold thought he was so clever, thought he had it all figured out. Marry the young girl with the property, get her declared insane, take everything, move on with his life. It should have worked. In 1969, Kentucky, it should have been easy. But he made one mistake. He underestimated me, thought I was too young, too naive, too obedient to see through his plan. Thought I'd just accept whatever fate he decided for me. He was wrong. I found those papers. I ran. And in running, I saved my own life. People back then would have called me selfish for leaving, would have said I should have stayed and worked it out, should have been a better wife, should have trusted my husband and submitted to his authority. Some probably still would say that, even now. But I know the truth. Walking away wasn't selfish. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't giving up. It was the bravest thing I've ever done. It was choosing life over death, freedom over captivity, my own future over someone else's plan for me. And I want to say this clearly to anyone who might be listening, anyone who might need to hear it. Walking away doesn't make you a failure. Sometimes, walking away is what saves your life. I think about all the women who didn't get away, the ones who ended up in those state hospitals, their spirits broken by drugs and electric shocks and years of being told they were crazy, the ones who stayed in marriages that slowly killed them, dying a little more each day until there was nothing left. The ones who tried to run but got caught, got dragged back, got punished for daring to want freedom. I was lucky. Lucky that bus clerk lied to Harold for me. Lucky that Mrs. Crawford gave me a chance. Lucky that Pete hired me. Lucky that I didn't get found in those early days when I was most vulnerable. But it wasn't just luck. It was also choice. It was deciding every single day that I was going to survive, that I was going to build something better, that I wasn't going to let Harold Whitmore or anyone else define who I was or what my life would be. Last week, I received a package in the mail. It was from the county clerk's office back in my hometown. Inside was an updated property deed, freshly printed, with my name on it in official black letters, Evelyn May Collins Turner, sole owner. There was also a note from the clerk, a woman named Patricia whom I don't remember. She wrote, "Mrs. Turner, when I was researching this property's history, I was fascinated by your story. I don't know all the details, but I can see that you've been fighting for this for a very long time. I'm glad you finally got what was rightfully yours. Sometimes justice is slow, but it comes eventually. Congratulations." I sat with that note for a long time, crying again like I seem to do so much these days. But these were good tears, healing tears. Because she was right. Justice was slow. Took 55 years. But it came. I've been thinking about what to do with that property. Part of me wants to see it again, wants to stand on that land my daddy worked so hard to buy, wants to walk through that house he built with his own hands. But I'm old now, and that journey feels too hard, and maybe some things are better left as memories. I've decided to donate it. There's an organization that helps women escaping domestic violence, provides them with safe housing and job training and legal support. They've agreed to take the property, will use it to build a shelter where women can go when they need to run, just like I ran. My daddy's land will become a place of refuge, a place where scared women can catch their breath and figure out their next steps, a place where they can start to rebuild their lives, just like I rebuilt mine. That feels right. Feels like the perfect ending to this story. If you have a daughter, a granddaughter, a niece, a young woman in your life, tell her this story. Tell her that she doesn't have to accept what anyone else decides for her. Tell her that her voice matters, her choices matter, her life is her own. Tell her that walking away from danger doesn't mean she's weak. It means she's strong enough to choose herself. Tell her that systems and people might try to trap her, to control her, to make her believe she has no options. But there are always options. They might be hard options, scary options, options that mean losing everything you've known. But they exist. And tell her that sometimes, even when it seems like the bad guys have won, even when years go by and nothing seems to change, justice can still come. Maybe not in the way you expected, maybe not as fast as you wanted, but it can come. After all these years, what was mine stayed mine. Not because Harold defended it, not because any man protected it for me, but because my daddy loved me enough to put it in my name, and because I was brave enough to walk away before anyone could take it from me. I walked away in 1969, and everyone thought I was heartless, crazy, ungrateful. But I wasn't any of those things. I was just a young girl, trying to stay alive, trying to stay free, trying to hold on to herself in a world that wanted to erase her. And I did it. Against all odds, I did it. That scared girl who got on that bus with $13. She grew into a woman who built her own life, loved and was loved, survived and thrived, and finally got what was rightfully hers. My name is Evelyn Mae Collins Turner. I'm 84 years old, and this is my story. A story of survival, of strength, of justice delayed but not denied. A story that I'm finally ready to tell. And if somewhere out there's another young woman facing what I faced, feeling trapped like I felt trapped, believing there's no way out, I want her to know there is a way. It won't be easy. It might take everything you have, but you can do it. You can walk away. You can build a new life. You can survive. I know, because I did. And if I could do it in 1969, you can do it now. Be brave, be strong, and know that you deserve a life that's yours. Always yours. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from? Did it touch your heart? Do you know someone who needs to hear it? Leave me a comment. Tell me your story. Let's remind each other that we're not alone, that we're stronger than we think, and that freedom is always, always worth fighting for. Thank you for listening to this old woman's story. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being here. And remember, walking away doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's what saves your life. God bless you all.